South, the Pinewood High School Incident, Chapter 8. The morning progressed, and the two soon found themselves surrounded by the other coven members, all of them seated around a large table, engaging in a type of merriment that Cassidy could only dream of after seeing posts of parties on Hunter. With each passing of food from one of the girls to another, a part of her felt warm and comforted at the lack of boundaries and rules. Here were the icons of her school, the pinnacle of feminine perfection, and she was considered their equal. As she fought the urge to pinch herself, Cassidy joined in on the feast, occasionally taking glances at the head of the table to Jessica. "Girls, I'd like to say something," Jessica decided to say after a while. "I'd like to congratulate you all on a mostly successful protest." "Yeah, it went down pretty well, right?" Tara chimed in after finishing the food in her mouth. "We had a lot of trouble out of the other protesters, though. Who would have thought that one of them would bring a gun to stop the show?" "Yeah, about that," Heather said as she reached into a bag she brought to the table. "Full transparency, right?" At first, Cassidy didn't think much about the act, but when she heard a thud echo throughout the table, she looked at the small black item that was placed and held her hand at her mouth. There, placed in front of everyone, was a pistol, the presence of which made the room grow silent. Her pulse quickened as she studied the weapon and thought back on the reason why Heather excused herself to her. Everyone maintained their gaze on the object until Heather began to speak again. "I'm sorry I caused so much trouble for you, Cassidy," Heather said honestly. "I wanted you to be as far from the trouble because you're new, but orders are orders." "I can't believe you, Heather," Penelope folded her arms. "And don't tell me that it was all Mother's plan. She knows how I feel about guns. This sort of behavior is what they expect from our side." "What's the matter, Penny?" Heather smiled. "I thought you clairvoyant types were able to see everything." "We needed to show that we were serious about keeping that monster from hurting people." Heather reached for her cup and took a few sips before continuing. "Don't worry, sis. It was just to make a little noise. Besides, it's not like that self-righteous prick was going to get hit, not with all of those sheep licking his boots." Cassidy's gaze instantly fell on Jessica, who was looking intently on the plate of fruit in front of her. She didn't know how to take the sudden confession or what to say that would help ease Jessica's thoughts, fighting the impulse to blurt out something about her father. After a moment of inner deliberation, she decided on what she could say, and with a forced smile, she nodded to her fellow witches. "Thank you, Heather." Her gaze was still on the weapon. "It's scary to think that it was us that did that, but we're safe and together. That's all that matters, right?" There was a moment of silence as all the girls held their tongues, Cassidy taking the hint and lowering her gaze to mimic Jessica. After a little while, Jessica lifted her head and placed her hands on the table. She looked around the table and confirmed that the others were feeling the same way she was. A wave of anxiety and uncertainty had managed to sit at the table with them. For how calm she was, Cassidy wondered what Jessica was honestly thinking about Brett, wondering if she was planning to secretly steal away to a hospital or meet her mother wherever the politician was hiding. It didn't take much longer for her to get an answer, however, as when Jessica had finished another bunch of grapes, she sat tall in her chair to address her juniors. "Thank you for being honest, Heather," Jessica began. "I know that you all know about me and my relationship to Councilman Laverty. I don't have anything to do with that man anymore, and my feelings for him are nostalgic at best. You placed us in a good amount of danger, Heather, regardless of your intent. We don't use the weapons of men to deal with our enemies. I'll have to talk to Mother about this later. I understand. Heather accepted the terms with a formality that seemed foreign to everyone watching. It took a moment for the girls to get comfortable enough to resume their personal conversations. But as things began to pick up between Penelope and Tara, Cassidy's phone rang. A few giggles escaped Heather as the singing cat ringtone echoed throughout the dining room. She excused herself and went into the hallway to see who it was that was calling, her desire wanting the person to be James. As she was prepared to further cement the expectation, she paused everything when she saw the name of the caller, her gut constricting under the pressure of her memory. It was her mother. Hello. Cassidy sounded as distant as one would sound when addressing a stranger. Are you okay? Sandra was careful. Yes. Can you come home? She tried. Cassidy felt her fist clench at her mother's plea. It was strange to be asked something so trivial, for it to be coming from her mother of all people. She was always so good for her and her dad, never speaking out of turn or causing much fuss in the time she was able to remember. By this time, Cassidy was in the long hallway that led to the dining room, making sure to take her time as she paced through the area. When she felt confident to respond to the pleading woman, she did her best to not sound like an ungrateful brat. I think that I want to stay where I am for now, Mom. She could tell that her mother was upset by how long it took for her to respond. I would like for you to come home, okay? I need you to help me. Your brother has a job coming up, and we need your help to... I said no, Mom. Cassidy was louder than she wanted to be. I'll be home when I feel like coming home. Honestly, you and Arthur pulling that little stunt with Reverend Jacobs was the last straw. Just leave me alone for right now, okay? Back off. With that, Cassidy hung up the phone and leaned against the nearby wall to catch her breath. She could feel her anger building as she thought on how desperate her mother sounded, how feeble the older woman was pretending to be. It was because of the accident that her mother lost the power she once had, and hearing her beg for help made her want to punch a wall. Whoa, Cassidy! Heather's voice reached her. Easy on the malice, okay? Sorry. Cassidy fixed her face. I was talking to my mother. Oh, it's one of those stories, huh? Heather walked closer. My mom's always on my case, too. She just doesn't get it, you know? Here we are, young and in the best times of our lives, and these old hags keep trying to tell us what to do. I'm glad Lydia isn't like that, or I would not be here. Right. Cassidy let her voice trail off. She suddenly realized that, despite spending the night with her, she didn't know much of anything about Heather. Besides her being a gun owner, or at least known to be able to use one, the girl was a mystery. The other girls talked about how she was a gutter witch, something she had assumed was a slur at first, but was told by Jessica that it was a legitimate craft. She took notice to a charm that the witch wore on her wrist, a braided cord with amethyst beads protecting a silver pendant, and decided to use that to probe further. Hey, Heather. Cassidy prepared herself. Why are you here? So blunt. I see why Jessica likes you. Heather smiled as she stopped short of Cassidy's reach. I'm here because when I was little, there was a fortune teller at a carnival that I went to. The old lady didn't know what she was doing, but it didn't matter. It was enough to spark my curiosity. That's it, right? Why do any of us do anything when it comes to life and living? Curiosity may kill cats, but it makes people smarter, right? Anyway, I'm here because I was curious, and Lydia gives me answers. Heather stared at Cassidy, unsure as to what else could be given to her in terms of an answer to the question. Cassidy took the hint and avoided the girl's gaze with a nod of her head, something she had hoped would ease the awkwardness between them. It didn't, as when Cassidy thought that the worst of the encounter was over, Heather walked up as close as possible to Cassidy and stared into her eyes. You asked me. Now it's your turn. Heather didn't flinch. Why are you here? When Lydia told me to help you during the effigy burning, I didn't expect for you to contact a spirit. I've seen that you stopped hiding your scars. Even the one you got from the rally is gone. Jessica's concerned that you're not ready for what you've been getting involved in recently. But really, why? Cassidy tried to pull the answer from thin air. Power, Cassidy. Heather backed off and began to walk away. It's the only thing that matters to anyone. Whether you want to avoid it or own it, power is what brought us together. You're coming into your own power now. Penny helped you to see that, as well as me and the others. You have to accept what's in you for what it is. Give it what it wants. Heather walked away without giving Cassidy anything else to go on. The wild card of a girl paced away to another corner of the mansion as if their conversation never happened. Filing it away in her vast library of thoughts, Cassidy decided to wander around a bit to familiarize herself with her new dwellings. There were some new details to the home that she didn't take notice to the last time that she was there. The gas fireplace in the main room that was turned on thanks to the cooler temperatures plaguing the area recently. She came across what she had assumed to be Brett's old office, a large wooden desk and matching empty bookshelves being the only thing remaining of him. Why would you give this up? She asked as she folded her arms in the doorway. Cassidy continued to wander around the home a bit, her thoughts on the litany of conversations and emotions spinning around her. Heather was right. She was in a place that she had never been and felt as though she were an imposter. The thought that she was willingly contacting a demon, that she was being controlled by it, and that she was unnaturally healing because of it made her shiver. Power, something that she felt she didn't have before, was intoxicating, and she loved it. The very thought exciting her into the idea of never being a victim again. As she walked, she saw the other witches going about, doing various little things to themselves that seemed to be busy work. Tara was moving a few things for Jessica outside, some boxes and other odds and ends. Penelope was meditating in a space away from everyone else, something that made Cassidy think back to Heather's comment about safe spaces. Speaking of which, the fellow wanderer was dancing through the place while listening to music on her headphones. The easy atmosphere made her forget about her mother and Arthur, the anguish of their predicament being replaced with the ambient joy and freeness of the coven. As she made her way to the front of the mansion, the chime of the doorbell brought her back to earth. "Hey, Cass, can you get that?" Jessica shouted from another room. Like a good subordinate, Cassidy walked to the front door without reservation. To her, it didn't matter who was on the other side of the door. Even if it were Brett himself, she felt confident enough to handle anything the world had to throw at her. The glass panels of the front door gave away that it were 3 people on the other side. One of them a familiar frame, and the others she wasn't too sure. She turned the handle and prepared to greet her rescuer with a smile she knew she never gave before, and when she was ready, she pulled the door open. "Hello, Mother." Cassidy's enthusiasm fell with her smile as she saw the other person that wasn't supposed to be there. "Cassidy, you look well rested." Lydia returned a smile that didn't feel as innocent. "Gabriella, go and make me a cup of tea, please. I trust you remember Brittany." Nothing had changed in the house between the other girls as their leader entered and made herself comfortable. Everyone maintaining their high spirits except Cassidy. Her demeanor towards the rest of the girls shifted from the comfortable state she enjoyed into a piercing anxiety as she eyed her bully. Brittany seemed to catch on after the two glanced at each other at the same time and, as if wanting the same thing, motioned to meet away from the others. The stoic girl made her way down an empty hallway, and she followed suit, much more confident that she was not in any real danger than previously thought. The two met near the bedrooms, Brittany taking a moment to look at the large master room that Cassidy explored earlier. The girl's shock at the scale of such a room would have been cute to Cassidy if she wasn't aware of why they were there to begin with. As if understanding her feelings, Brittany turned to face the cautious girl, while leaning against the door frame with folded arms. "So, did you find out the answer yet?" The girl took initiative. "When did you—" Cassidy's surprise at her bully's sudden appearance overtook her. "What are you doing here? This coven has done nothing but help me, and it doesn't need someone with negative energy bringing it down." "You really don't pay attention, do you?" The bully smiled. "I tried to get you to understand, but I guess you're committed to the game. They even got you on the news. Do me a favor, daddy killer." Brittany straightened herself. "Things are going to move fast from this point on. You can try to protect them as best you can, but stay out of my way." Cassidy's body became rigid as she thought on what she could do to the unsuspecting imposter. She knew that the girl standing before her was playing her new family for fools, and that she needed to be dealt with. But she wondered what Jessica would think if it were discovered that she acted out against a member of the coven. Brittany seemed to notice Cassidy's malice towards her and drew in closer to test her resolve. After a second or two of the standoff, the coven was called to attention by Gabriella. Brittany scoffed and walked past her, shoving into her nemesis' shoulder as hard as possible before leaving. She took her time walking back towards the other girls, doing her best to calm herself down by breathing deeply. She wondered why Lydia would allow a fox of a person to enter the chicken coop, and found herself questioning the validity of the woman leading them. The older woman had seemed so knowledgeable up to that point, but with Brittany's induction, she wondered if Lydia had their best interest at heart. She made her way to the main room and found a seat near the path to the foyer, doing her best to avoid Brittany, who was situated beside their leader. Jessica was on the opposite end of the room from Cassidy, and the other girls filled the space sporadically. When they were all present, Lydia began their meeting. I know you all are aware by now that I was responsible for telling Heather to cause a scene at the rally. I didn't specify that she should use a gun to scatter the crowd, but it was effective in its own way. Because we were so successful, I'd like for us to thank Heather for her dedication to the coven. Thank you, sister. Brittany made sure she was the first to speak. Thanks, sis. Tara was the next one to chime in. Thank you, sister. Jessica acknowledged, even though we nearly were trampled and arrested. I mean, come on, Mother. That was reckless, and we all know it. Cassidy nearly... Lydia shot a look at Jessica that Cassidy recognized from the first meeting. The same show of dominance that the older woman displayed when Jessica tried to defend her before. She was breathing heavier than normal, her anger growing with every second she looked on at their mother's commanding face. Just like before, Jessica silenced herself and folded her arms as she leaned back against the wall behind her. Cassidy, Lydia called her without looking. Come here, please. Cassidy looked around the room before moving. Her thoughts locked on the last time she was commanded by Lydia to stand before her. There was something that was different than the last time, however. A part of her that was not willing to yield to whatever treatment she was going to be subjected to. She obeyed, walking at her own pace up to the beautiful woman. When she was standing directly in front of her, Cassidy stood still and waited for whatever punishment she was going to receive because of Jessica's outburst. Look at you, Lydia began. It didn't take more than a month for you to become more confident. A part of me wonders if it's because of the spirit you managed to contact. They're like that, you know. Confident. Just as Brittany had said, it happened quick. A sudden sound vibrated her eardrums that pulsed from a portable speaker in Brittany's hand, the noise sending her body into a frenzy as her vision blurred into a near-blinding redness. She released a yell that shook the other girls, her breathing becoming shallow as her muscles tensed while staring at their leader. A sudden compulsion made her want to rip the woman's throat out. But somehow, as she managed to control her breathing, she caught herself before delivering the blow. She let out a yell as she looked at the arm that was poised to end their mother's life. No, she fought. I'm in control. Are you? Lydia raised an eyebrow. The stress from holding back the demon was beginning to be too much for her to manage. She could hear the other girls shouting and trying to intervene, the effort being stopped by Brittany. The bodyguard had positioned herself perfectly between the scene and the other girls, her presence terrifying all but Jessica. The stronger girl stepped into Brittany's face, as if ready to strike, both of them unwilling to yield to the other. Get out of my way. Jessica's voice was sharp. Make me. Brittany returned a menacing grin. Before their confrontation could spiral out of control, Cassidy commanded them both with great effort. Stop! It was becoming easier for her to speak. I'm in control now. Cassidy stared blankly at Lydia as she calmed herself to the point of breathing regularly, her body still rigid from the effects of the projected noise. Lydia flashed her a nod as she removed her hand from near her leader's throat. As Cassidy returned her hands to her side, Brittany stopped playing the sound as Lydia began to clap. "Good," she said while barely moving. "I took the time to review the footage of that day you savagely beat your friend nearly to death. I know that you were thinking that the entity you managed to contact had entered you after the burning, but it was with you the entire time, my dear." Cassidy lowered her gaze at the sudden revelation. A part of her knew, but she didn't want to acknowledge it. The thought making her realize just how much of a freak she really was. Jessica shoved Brittany out of the way, made her way to Cassidy's side, and placed her arm around her to comfort the shaking girl. "Why are you putting her through this torture, Lydia?" Jessica shot back. "This coven is supposed to be a place where we grow in our power. What is all of this? Why are you constantly trying to hurt us? Having Heather go behind everyone's back. You've been inviting violence into our sisterhood, and I'm tired of it. We trusted you with our vulnerabilities, and it seems like you're exploiting us for your sick entertainment." "You saw it yourself, sweetheart." Lydia motioned to Cassidy. "I am helping you all grow in your power. When this girl came to us, she was on her knees, wanting to die. Now look at her, a proper spiritualist, able to command the spirits to do her bidding. It's hard to accept the things we don't understand. But that's why I'm here, daughter. To help you see clearly." The room grew quiet. All of the girls thrust it into their minds as Lydia continued to minister to them. "The methods that I employed could be seen as extreme, but the results are evident. Jessica, you remember how it was for you in the beginning, the way how your family discarded you for their selfish career chasing. Tara, how your dad disowned you because of your desires was nothing short of abuse. Oh, sweet Penny, how many times have your parents tried to keep you from overdosing? You're better now because we found out you were being called by your grandmother." She turned to Cassidy. "Cassidy is the exact same as you. Her story is one of depression and misery. Her mind trapped on the pain of the past. Somewhere along the way, she managed to gain a power, and she needs our help to grow in the way you all have." Jessica looked puzzled at the woman's speech, doing her best to put together the mess that was the late afternoon discussion. She looked to the other girls, each of them still searching within themselves the same way, before looking at the one in her arms. Cassidy had calmed down and had seemed to be nearly as normal as she had been before the meeting. She let go of her and took one more look around the room before looking at Lydia. She had finally seemed to understand what Lydia was saying and felt defeated by the woman's logic. "I'm standing in the way of my own growth," Jessica confessed. "That's it, Jessica." Lydia nodded in approval. "Don't worry. We're going to take the final steps to ensure that you grow in the same way." The late afternoon turned into early evening as the world began to grow dark. All of the girls casted throughout the mansion. They were instructed by Lydia to prepare themselves for a group ritual and Cassidy was unsure of what that entailed. She was stuck with Gabriella. The soft-spoken witch was different than she had initially assumed. They didn't talk much as they focused on dressing themselves in the black robes Lydia had brought with her, but that didn't stop Gabriella from addressing her as she finished. "Cassidy, did you need any help with the back zipper?" Her calming voice made Cassidy forget about the strong musk perfume she wore. "It's almost time." "I think I need you." She accepted the assistance. Once her back was zipped and she was giving a final once-over by Gabriella, the two of them made their way towards the living room. Before they got to where they were going, however, her curiosity got the better of her. Of all the coven members that she had come to know, there was one that seemed to keep herself away from her the longest, that being the conservative-looking girl from Landon County. The remote place was as distant as the other cities were close, needing a longer car ride than any other to reach the border. And she wondered what life was like in the more rural area. "You must really care about the coven to come from so far away." Cassidy looked at her as they continued down the hallway. "I guess that we haven't really had the chance to talk since your joining." Gabriella kept her focus forward. "I managed to work out a deal with the school when I transferred. In exchange for staying with Lydia, I get to enroll." "You stay with Mother?" Cassidy was thrown for a loop. "Wait, are you two?" Gabriella slowed a little as she looked at the expression Cassidy was making. She noticed how Gabriella had green eyes opposed to Lydia's piercing blue ones. The possibility of yet another familial bond she didn't know about, making her imagination run wild. Just how many members of the coven were related, or had ties to prominent people? It had seemed as though Gabriella read her mind, as just before they reached the living room, she stopped her. "Not at all." Gabriella's smile was intoxicating. "I was homeless just before the acquisition of the school. It's different in Landon County when you don't have anywhere to go. You can just live in the woods. I got arrested a few times for living in abandoned shacks and tents. Just as I was about to go to juvie for stealing, I was bailed out by a woman from Southern Cuts. It was weird because as soon as I was released, I was contacted by Lydia and placed in her care. Since then, I've been with her in Pinewood, further south, like you're going to North Carolina." "I'm sorry." Cassidy didn't know what to say. "I mean, to hear about your struggle." "What struggle?" Another smile gave Cassidy a shock. "From where I'm sitting, I've won the lottery." When the girls entered the front room, they were met by a surprising sight. All of the other girls were dressed in the same way, their robes matching their mood. Since the last sermon from Lydia, all of them felt an unease settle within their minds. For however long the coven had existed, they were the fruit the older woman was growing, and they didn't know to what end. Even the way they carried their conversations in the moment were hesitant, each of them doing their best to put on airs to little effect. They were uncertain as to what lay before them, and Cassidy assumed the worst of their trials were yet to come. "Prepare yourselves, sisters." Brittany's hard voice grabbed them from near the kitchen. "Mother is ready. Follow me." The girls obeyed and followed Brittany as she led them to the back of the mansion and outside, Jessica was the last witch to leave, following behind Cassidy, and decided to pull the unsuspecting girl to the side before exiting the home. Cass, wait a second. Jessica had a concerned look about her. Something doesn't feel right. What do you mean? Cassidy said as she grew worried at Jessica's serious tone. Lydia said that this is for you. Isn't this what you want? Before Jessica could answer, the two were approached by Gabriella, the girl presenting herself with a calm that exhumed aggression. Stay close to us, sisters. Gabriella looked at Jessica. We're about to invoke forces that are beyond our understanding. Keep your minds focused on what you want to manifest and let go of your attachments. After the warning, the girls were led, with the other witches, to the stables where Lydia had set up an altar. As they piled into the space, they were instructed to split into two lines and walk around the spray-painted circle on the ground. Tara and Penelope were placed at the front of the two lines and made to burn sage while leading their respective line until the seventh encircling. On the last time around, each of the girls were made to stand at specific spots and await further instruction. Cassidy looked at her fellow witches and then to Lydia, who was standing off on the side with her attention on something the girls couldn't see. Jessica, Lydia called without removing her focus. Lead us in our evocation. Jessica prepared to begin, but before she could, Lydia cut her off. Jessica, focus on the energy within you. You've done so much for your sisters and your community, but you aren't free yet. Your attachments to everything around you has kept you down, but tonight you will be loosed. Jessica did as she was told and led the girls as she had done many times before. Everyone engaged in the intoxicating bout of profession by following along with the chants and hand gestures. Cassidy found herself swaying with her sister's words with no hesitation, her body accustomed to what she was at one time adverse to. She kept up with the offering to the universe until she noticed that they were a sister short. Once the evocation was complete and the girls returned to their poised stature around the circle, they witnessed Brittany enter the space with none other than Goldilocks, leading the horse by the reins into the center of the circle. Jessica released a gasp as she made a move to approach the two, but Lydia stopped her. Stand still, Jessica. The woman's harsh tone caused everyone to recoil. This horse represents all that has been keeping you from growing in your power. It represents the arrogant wealth your family has blinded you with, and it must be given up so that you can focus on what is more important. No, Jessica hesitated. I'm not doing this. This has gone on for too long, Lydia. This is too much. Brittany managed to lead Goldilocks into the center of the circle by this time. The other girls looked at each other as Lydia's focus reached them. You see, my daughters? Lydia walked around the circle with an item covered in velvet. Material wealth can keep us from truly understanding our purpose, our greatest failure coming at the hands of our own selfish desires. Jessica, it isn't your fault. You've been born into a family that uses its influence to affect the people around them in a negative way. Like I told you before you joined us, you have the power to free others and lead them to truth. But you first have to be freed from the influence of man. Lydia stopped at Cassidy, the space between them filled with the scent of vanilla bean. Without further stalling, Lydia presented the blade to her from behind and waited for it to be taken. Cassidy could taste the copper-like tinge from the adrenaline pumping through her as she looked at the now uncovered dagger laying on the velvet covering. It may have been the silence of the others that compelled her to do so, but before she could refuse, she took the dagger into her hands and looked at the horse. Cassidy! Jessica seemed as though her heart was being ripped from her chest. Cassidy, please don't. Your sister is hurting, Cassidy. Lydia's voice was like a close whisper. It's time to set her free. She wanted to protest, but she couldn't. Her throat caught on the look of desperation on Jessica's face. The girl was tearful and panting with a panic that she related with. She knew that there was no way that she was going to do it. It was madness to think that she would kill the one creature that allowed for her and Jessica to bond. She placed her gaze on the blade and let her mind search for a way to get the horse out of the room and a way to deal with Brittany and Lydia. She stepped into the circle. Jessica was right earlier in saying that Lydia was the problem, the only issues with them coming whenever the aged witch placed herself into their affairs. It was her that had shown the greatest aggression towards her since the beginning. For her to demand obedience in that moment was the most foolish decision she assumed would come from an adult. She patted the horse's face. There was only one thing to do in that moment. She was going to discard the blade and get Jessica to remove the two sources of poison from their home. She was going to tell her that she was going to stay with her from then on and take care of her. She felt that there was no other answer than to remain at her sister's side, even if they had to deal with the other witches, even if they had to run away together and live off the land like Gabriella did, even if... No! She had ran the blade through Goldilocks' throat. The horse bucked against the attack with its fleeting might, but Cassidy managed to continue, managing to slash through the tendons with each stab. Blood spilled within the circle and covered her in warmth as the horse collapsed and kicked wildly on the ground. She didn't stop, even as Jessica screamed and was held back by Brittany. She continued to rip and tear through the horse until its head was nearly removed. The odd thing about the entire ordeal to her wasn't the fact that she was committing such a violent act. Rather, it was that she wasn't being controlled. She wanted to do it. Brittany let go of Jessica and left as the traumatized girl fell to her knees, her whimpering being enough to disarm Cassidy. She took a step towards the defeated girl and tried to touch her, but she was met with a look that assured her that the two would never be friends again. That part of her didn't care, however. That same part that nearly killed Amber allowed for her to defeat those cops and then to kill Jessica's prize horse. She turned and faced Lydia, who was prepared to leave behind Brittany. Mother, Cassidy managed to force the horse's blood from around her mouth. What have I done? Your job, Lydia said as she left Cassidy to her misery.